Here we are in Lviv once again. At least I am, but my guest isn't. Stephanie Baker, I'm delighted to welcome back to the channel. And of course, if you enjoyed this interview, please do check out our previous conversation, which I have to say is one of the favorite ones, at least of mine on the channel, because I learned such a tremendous amount. And I hope to do so again in this conversation. Stephanie is a writer at Bloomberg, covering the intersection of business and politics. She's also written for the Moscow Times, Radio Free Europe, and is the author of a fantastic book, Punishing Putin Inside the Global Economic War to Bring Down Russia. It tells the story of how a furious financial war unfolded following the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Today, however, we're going to branch into a related but slightly different topic, and that is, well, I call it combat propaganda. But Stephanie, welcome to the channel. How would you describe this topic we're going to be talking about?
I think you can label it in different ways. Some people call it cognitive warfare, information war, um, disinformation, misinformation. I think cognitive warfare is the closest description that matches what we're seeing. It is really a battle to shift people's perceptions of reality on key issues that are really important to the Kremlin. And I think that we've seen them do that, obviously, for decades. This is nothing new for the Russians. They pursued what they called active measures during the Soviet period, which was to try to shift people's perceptions of on key political issues. They planted conspiracy theories back in the Soviet period, the most famous of which is the conspiracy theory that HIV was cooked up in a US lab, and they planted that in an Indian publication, and it slowly spread. And I think the real difference that we're seeing now is that technology, social media platforms, AI has sped up the production rate and really, enabled them to churn out these stories, these fabricated stories on an industrial scale. And I think there's not enough attention to it. It's happening. People know it's happening. And I think when I started out doing this story, I was like, okay, yeah, of course, of course, Russia's propagating these phony sham stories to try to undermine Ukraine and undermine supporters of Ukraine in the West. And I think I had become somewhat desensitized to it. But then when I started looking, I realized how many people believe these fabricated stories. And I think that the impact of them is hard to measure, but it's almost like a slow drip of poison. You don't really realize how much it's making you sick until you're too deep into it to be cured. And I think that's what's so dangerous about this, and why it needs to be called out more.
Let's analyze maybe because there's often short-term tactical objectives, but they will potentially ladder up to a longer-term one. The same with active measures. The ultimately active measures was designed to bring us about a state of affairs where your enemy doesn't have the will to defend itself. But that doesn't happen all at once. It may happen over years or even decades, as Yuri Bizmynov described. I don't know how credible his ideas are, but certainly they are compelling and interesting. Is this the same process here? Because we see a lot of stories bubbling up at the moment in Ukraine and outside it. Before we hit record, we talked about a few of them, but we've got the biolabs nonsense rearing its head again. We've got the Ukraine is corrupt, etc. Therefore, what? Russia should occupy it and clean up corruption? I mean, that is on the face of it ludicrous. And there's an immigration story, which we won't cover here, but is causing extreme disquiet here. It seems to be almost entirely manufactured. In the short term, this seems to be designed to create distrust and division. But do you think it operates at a number of levels, both short term and long term, in the way these play out?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you can't underestimate the long-term impact of repeating a particular narrative and people maybe discounting one or two of those stories, but leaving and coming away from, say, scrolling on X or Facebook and and having that impression, and that impression lingers for a long time, or question marks about a certain individual, Zelensky, or a Western leader who has supported Ukraine. A false story is spread, it gets millions of views. In some cases on X, what we documented was these false stories, often about Zelensky, but also about Western leaders. They get millions of views on X. Some of those are inflated due to bots and bot activity that Russian actors are behind. But if you're looking at a video that's gotten 2 million, 7 million views, you automatically think that that might be more legitimate because so many other people have watched it. And that's a very subtle psychological effect of these sham stories. So, I mean, it gets really complicated because what the Russians are really good at is taking a kernel of truth and then distorting it beyond recognition. And that's what makes these stories so hard to counter, because there is sometimes a bit of truth to them. There is, for instance, the whole narrative that Zelensky is corrupt. We know, of course, that there is an ongoing corruption investigation in Ukraine right now involving people close to Zelensky. But the narratives that we tracked, and just to be clear, we went through and focused on X exclusively because that seems to be the place where a lot of these stories are getting picked up by mainstream politicians, because mainstream politicians are on X. We counted almost 200 narratives that we identified as the work of this group called Storm 1516, which has been propagating social media with these fabricated stories since August 2023. 40% of those 200 narratives were about Ukraine, and most of them were about Zelensky or Elena Zelenska, alleging that they were living the life of luxury on Western aid, misusing Western aid. Wild allegations that he was buying, he and his inner circle were buying yachts, a
Oh,
penthouse,
etc. Yeah.
a ranch in Wyoming. I mean, and they have been debunked. Not all of them have been debunked, but many of them have been debunked. But they have left viewers with the impression that he is indeed corrupt. They mostly avoided the real corruption scandal. We did identify one video that did get millions of views that was not marked as, questionable on X at all, that claimed that NABU investigators had found, a series of passports that Zelensky allegedly had, foreign passports. So in at least one case, they did try to pivot off of a real investigation, and they tried to present this as a NABU report, which NABU denied. And I think that's why they're very clever at the way they do this. They often present these stories as this is the reality that mainstream news outlets won't tell you about. So they're almost trying to bring in viewers to make them feel like, ooh, this is special. Sometimes they'll be presented in the format of a whistleblower. Sometimes they'll just be presented in the format of a news report, but it won't be clear who's behind the news report. Sometimes they will fake and pretend to be another news outlet, but often it is just a narrator, often with an American accent, narrating a story, a pastiche of clips and often forged documents to try to create a story that will then get repeated again and again and again on social media.
And this is the interesting aspect, I think, of it. Back in the day in the Cold War, Russian propaganda was far more ideologically rooted, far tougher because you're trying to convince somebody of something, a particular point of view, even if you're also trying to get them to distrust, their own politicians. Russian propaganda at this point doesn't seem to want to convince you of anything, but it's just finding ways to achieve its objective, which is division, disunity, creating a sense that you cannot solve problems. This is a key one. I think Ukrainians fortunately get beyond that, but we're susceptible to that, is to convince you that you have no agency. that everything's the same and everything's broken and there's no way to fix it. This extraordinary kind of nihilism, which they're so effective at. Effective because many Russians, unfortunately, also believe that. Their minds are wired to think in that way in some sense. But now we're in the social media age, and it seems that what they have created is a polyphony of voices. So you may have a particular story like the ones you mentioned, but they're then able to translate this into multiple persona. They're able to use Western sock puppets like Carlson and others. So what you're looking at is a sort of fake plurality, a sort of entire ecosystem or choir of voices. And then you add on to that the fact that they're sharing each other, amplifying each other, and they have huge audiences. This unfortunately seems to be beyond most people's ability to distinguish fact from fiction. It seems to be dangerously compelling.
Absolutely. And, what we saw that happen, and we tried to document as many cases as we could. A number, the X is still the place where established politicians have accounts and they're using it to communicate with the public and with voters. And we saw a number of instances where these stories invented in Moscow were planted either on an Instagram page or YouTube. They were then picked up by often a publication in Africa, sometimes as paid content, recycled on a purpose-built website, and then picked up by a set of influencers that regularly share this content. And then they will get picked up by established US politicians. J.D. Vance has repeated some of these narratives.
Of course it has. Of course.
Marjorie Taylor Greene has also done so, and other U.S. politicians have done that and gotten millions of views for instance, the narrative that two close associates of Zelensky bought two yachts, super yachts.
Khartiia Brigade has maybe the longest history of doing this stuff, and her repetition narrative seems even that no longer seems coincidental. I mean, do you think any of this is coincidental? Are some people repeating narratives because they've fallen for them? Do they see it as convenient, or they don't care? Or this is the point where I find it difficult when you start arguing with people about how much intentionality there are. Are people sharing sometimes these things, especially let's say Vance, because it's expedient to him and he knows what he's sharing is false, or this is difficult to tell.
I think on one level they don't care, and that's the point of this. The objective here is not necessarily to change people's minds. They're not going to change my mind or your mind, but they know there's a captive audience out there that is questioning Western aid to Ukraine, and they are giving them ammunition to reinforce that belief and to radicalize people's beliefs on that front. So I think it is shifting debate on the margins on certain issues, but I think it serves to radicalize people, as you said, sow division. In some cases you see they don't really care if it's left or right. They'll go after whatever. They're just serving as chaos agents. But I think it is really designed to undermine people's faith in institutions and purveyors of the truth, that they don't know what's true anymore. And that's the other thing that this campaign really focused on, was undermining elections in the West. We saw about a third of the narratives targeted at elections. Obviously there was the Hungarian election most recently. They piled in right at the end, trying to undermine Peter Magyar. They failed, of course. He won in a landslide. But they did shift the debate. There was a lot more anti-EU debate in there as a result, questions about him, about Magyar. So they're now focusing heavily on the election in Armenia, trying to undermine the current Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, who is leaning towards the EU. And this is a really important election for the Kremlin. This is Russia's backyard, and they want to make sure that Armenia stays in Russia's sphere of influence. And of course, I think they're probably going to do the very same ahead of the midterm elections in the U.S., which are very pivotal and high stakes in terms of who controls Congress. We saw them do this in the 2024 election, spreading fabricated stories about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. There was a video that also went viral alleging that immigrants were voting in the state of Georgia. So they'll do things that question whether or not the election is actually legitimate, free and fair. So we expect them to do that again ahead of the midterms. And that is undermining faith in institutions, essentially.
That's it. And, it feeds into a couple of core Russian narratives, which is you don't have agency as an individual. You're just a little person. You can't know the truth. The truth is unknowable. Everyone's as bad as each other. I mean, there's all these little mechanics in there, which this stuff plays off. We unfortunately saw that in Brexit. We see this with Farage and the rise of our own mini Orban or mini Trump in the UK, which is deeply, deeply disturbing to my mind. How do we counter it? Because it seems to me after a few years of sort of looking into this area, there are no simple answers about how to do this. The sands are shifting. There are a lot of organizations, many of which are on the OSINT side, tracking narrative patterns of behavior. I find that fascinating as somebody who creates content. I'm not sure that really filters through to the public in any serious way. You have EU institutions, some of them reasonably well funded. But again, the figures of public engagement, there's some serious questions about what that's actually doing. Stop Fake is a famous Ukrainian one, but this idea of narrative busting and just calling out, I don't think that works. Because if you have, this polyphony which Russian propaganda operates through, and you have a corruption of, our media environments with paid actors and all the rest of it, fact checking does not cut through that because, well, you can try and pick one little thread out of a jumper or something, but actually what you're not doing is tackling what I call the ontological picture, the whole world of narratives that built up. It's you're poking a little pin into it, but what they've done is create an entire fake reality, and they've rooted it in people's identity and a sense of their identity under threat. I'll stop talking, but how do we tackle this stuff?
So this is something we really wrestled with when we did this story. I wanted to make sure that we were not inadvertently spreading some of these narratives by calling them out, and being really clear about labeling stuff in a way that made it absolutely crystal clear that these were fake stories. And again, calling out the individual influencers for spreading them without then amplifying their platform at the same time. I think fundamentally you have to call this stuff out. That is the very basis. That's the minimum that we have to do is call out the fabricated stories.
It's highly
If
to call it in marketing, but it doesn't get you beyond. There are many layers, I guess, beyond that, but you have to go through this hygiene process.
Exactly, because I mean, for one, there's the threat that large language models will take some of this material, and I think that's what the Russians ultimately want, take some of these fabricated stories and start repeating them. And that's when they've really infected the mainstream conversation. So unless there are fact checkers calling out and debunking some of this stuff, you won't have large language models able to deal with it. And I saw that in my research. Often, say ChatGPT or Claude was very good at, I would just check. They would say, no, this is disinformation. But there were some narratives that we tracked and identified that did go viral, but had not been debunked or fact checked, and they just said, "Oh, I don't know." There was an absence of information. I think that is dangerous in the age of AI to not have these things called out and checked out, debunked. I think the biggest problem is the social media giants dismantling or de-emphasizing their trust and safety measures and their content moderation. And we saw that most dramatically at X when Musk took over at the end of 2022. He fired a bunch of people, including content moderators, and really de-emphasized the trust and safety initiatives that they had, pursued. And it wasn't perfect before, but they were getting pretty good at dealing with this and calling it out, labeling it, or removing stuff in some instances. But he got rid of most of that. And you saw Storm 1516 really take off about 9 months after he took over, really using X as the most sort of fertile platform for seeding some of this stuff. And what we found was that the X policy of relying on community notes to label content as either fabricated or questionable isn't working. Less than 20% of the Russian narratives that we identified had a community note, and not every post with that narrative had a note attached. And that's because the way X operates, they need to have people from opposing viewpoints agree on that a post is inauthentic or fabricated. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is in the US, at least, they had a bunch of agencies that they had set up in the wake of 2016 to monitor covert nation state backed influence operations and call it out. That they were designed to expose it, monitor it, and expose it. And the Trump administration has dismantled two key agencies, one at the FBI and one at the intelligence agencies. And there was another at the State Department that was defunded at the end of 2024 after Trump won the election. So there's no one watching the henhouse, so to speak. And I think that's really scary because you can say, oh, well, calling this stuff out doesn't do much, but a bunch of agencies did do that in 2024. And I think it was important to just have an official government agency say this story about Georgians voting, immigrants voting in Georgia is not true. I think that's really important to have an official statement on that. And at this point, you really only have Europe with the Digital Services Act as the only forum for trying to regulate social media giants on this front. And so far, they've been a bit timid. The DSA has an ongoing investigation into X that is looking at misinformation. They handed out a small, relatively speaking, fine in December for 120 million euros. That was part of that broader investigation. Now, it was for other smaller things, including the way X uses blue check marks, saying that that is now implying to users that these identities have been verified when in fact they haven't. And that is a big problem because a lot of the big accounts that are spreading this Russian misinformation are anonymous. We don't know who they are. And they're able to operate behind this hidden identity, spreading these narratives. And we don't know if they're GRU agents or are they just people trying to make a living by driving engagement on X. It's impossible to tell. Money is certainly a factor, but whether or not, and I think we encountered several of these accounts that they just want content to drive engagement. And they don't care if it's true or not.
It seems, I mean, again, it's going to sound paranoid, but actually not, because when you look at the detail, I think it pans out. You also have a whole series of narratives that are being propagated, and they're often also and then amplified by people who genuinely sort of believe these things. And that is that Europe is lost, that European civilization has collapsed, that it's gone, and the city is a ruin, and you can't even step out of the street in London, etc., which of course you'll know is beyond absurd, especially compared to the centers of some US cities. But it seems that this serves a purpose, and that is also enshrined in the new US national security policy. which is essentially to try to degrade institutions in Europe and that sense of cohesion. Is it not wild speculation to say that actually a lot of the intent behind this is probably aimed at things like the Digital Services Act to remove the checks and balances that are preventing, in some ways, not fully, as you say, and we could be doing a lot more, but preventing what I would almost think of as a kind of digital commercial tyranny from overwhelming the sort of fragile freedoms that do have checks and balances and some sort of rule of law limitations wrapped around them.
I think that we haven't seen specific Russian narratives on that front, but you do see the response from U.S. officials to the fine on X was this is censorship. You're trying to censor, you Europeans are trying to censor American citizens, and we're not going to stand for this. And in fact, they have created a website in the US called freedom.gov, and it has an image, an animated image of Paul Revere on his horse. And they're claiming that they're going to populate that with stories or information that have been banned, that's been banned in Europe. Now, they haven't done that yet. They probably won't get their
Haven't
act.
found anything, maybe.
They haven't gotten their act together to like pull that one off, but that is how it's viewed in the US, and they don't have to prove it, but they just repeat it again and again and again. And it is, of course, part and parcel of this. We're going to defend our American tech giants against you, you liberal Europeans who are trying to crush the First Amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get that sort of amplified through a lot of my friends who are, I would say sort of conservative, pro-Ukraine. You still hear these narratives over and over, and you think, hang on a second, guys, you really need to stop and think about what you're doing here and who
Yeah.
you're carrying water for on this one. Last sort of question here, but I could throw questions at you all day long, and I think it would still be deeply fascinating. The last one here, because of the sort of time restraint. What are we doing on an institutional level? EU, UK, etc., maybe Canada. What are we doing institutionally, and where are the real gaps? Where is it lacking? Where do we need to step up? Because as you say, in the era of LLMs, potentially then combined with quantum computing, etc., the capacity for Russia to generate fakes and this polyphony of fakery is only going to grow exponentially. What are we doing, not just to match it, but to try and overtake that?
Well, it goes back to my book actually on sanctions that they are trying to use sanctions. You've seen the EU and the UK try to sanction individuals that they have identified as being behind some of these Russian disinformation operations. The UK, for instance, just recently rolled out new sanctions around disinformation about Armenia. How effective those are, I think, remains to be seen. I think it's important as part of the calling out. We know what you're doing, and we're not going to sit back and just accept this. I think you've seen, for instance, in France, the French authorities be quite effective at calling out specific influencers who are regularly spreading these fabricated stories. And we saw in the case of the French influencers, several accounts being taken down as a result. In Germany, what they've done, there was a particular narrative spread about the former Green Party leader, Robert Habeck, and they successfully got that video blocked in Germany using German law. That video is still available outside of Germany to other German speakers. So I think there are real concrete steps that can be taken with the social media giants, but they're European governments, I think, are very reluctant to take them on specific stories. But I think that is what is really needed here. There needs to be some vigilance. And this is war. This is information warfare. So it needs to be treated as such. You can't just let the enemy roll over you and not respond. You have to hit back. I think that they're not. I think U.S. As obviously the U.S. government is not equipped to do this now. I don't think Europe and the UK are fully equipped. I think France has a digital monitoring agency called Viginum, and I think they're quite good. They're really monitoring this stuff because the Russians have gone after Emmanuel Macron quite aggressively. We documented, I think, 14 narratives targeting him and his wife that it went viral on social media.
Sorry, yeah. I mean, they've gone after him and her. I mean, with Candace Owens repeating this, hopefully, which she's going to get sued for, the lie about Macron's wife actually not being a woman. I mean, they're outrageous. Some of these stories.
The Russians piled in on that one. They didn't invent that, but they added to that story to help it spread more widely. So, yeah, I think that there has to be a rethink about how governments are set up to respond to this, and not just in terms of the Digital Services Act, but almost rapid reaction forces or teams to respond to it, which is what you saw in the German election with the Greens. They did have a rapid response team, and I think in Hungary, Peter Magyar also had a rapid response. They were very quick to respond to some of this stuff. And I think that's what you need to do. This is the new reality that we're dealing with. You need to expect it, and you need to have a team ready to respond.
Absolutely. Well, there are a million things I could ask you about this one, and hopefully we'll get to another episode on this topic as your research, continues, and we learn more about the mechanics of this sort of combat disinformation unit that Russia is unleashing. And as you say, with upcoming elections, especially in the US, that activity is likely to intensify. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your tremendous work and those of your colleagues. It's so important that these are tackled. And as you say, far too little is being done in the media to cover these off in such depth and with such rigor. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Always great to talk.
Let's unpack the book, The Dark Heart of Russia, because it helps to explain how we got to this point. It's edited by me, Jonathan Fink, the creator and host of the Silicon Curtain podcast. It's published this month by Gibson Square in London and is already available for order and delivery online, though officially the PR release will coincide with the Phantom Victory Day parade in Moscow on May the 9th. 30 interviews, 30 voices selected from over 1,000 interviews that have been conducted on this channel. And the lineup that we have put into this book reads like a who's who of the people Moscow would most like to silence. Bill Browder, Garry Kasparov, Fiona Hill, General David Petraeus, Peter Pomerantsev, Luke Harding, Mark Galeotti, Keir Giles, Anders Puck-Nielsen, Alexander Etkind, Yuri Felshtinsky, General Ben Hodges, and many, many more. And with a strong set of Ukrainian voices included, it could be no other way. Volodymyr Ermolenko, Alena Holoshka, Sasha Dozhik, Olga Takaryuk, and Alexander Romantsova, among several others. And the timing is not accidental. We are releasing this book precisely as the Kremlin's central myth, the myth of Russian victory, Russian strength, Russian inevitability, is being shredded in real time. Ukraine matters, and I think this book matters, and our support for Ukraine is the only way of stopping Russian imperialism from its eternal outward expansion and the destruction that it brings in its wake.